belong to the Siddha Parampara. So you would have visited the Dhyanalayam. There is our Paramaguru, Agastya Maharshi, and there is Kriya Babaji, our Guru, and there is Adi Shankara Bhagavad Pada. You have been a student of the Itihasa Purana, where we find Puranic stories illustrating the concepts of Purushartha, for example, Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha. And as a researcher in the Puranas, it was very enlightening to listen to you talk about dating of the Mahabharata or dating of some of the episodes of the Puranas. What is your view on Agastya Maharshi?
Thank you. Before I get into Agastya Maharshi, a couple of comments related to the Gurukul.
Oh, yes, yes.
When you mentioned you started in 21, that was a shock and a surprise to me.
Okay.
Because we know each other for 6+ years.
Yes, yes.
And so I was under the impression that it's possibly that long. So if you consider 21 as a starting point, so that's like barely what, 3 years?
3 years, yes.
And just the setup that you have, what the level it exists is actually truly amazing. So you mentioned also the Panchakosha framework. America right now is actually struggling, but also I would say very few people are trying to experiment. Very recently, when I say very recently, it may be even 10 years ago, I don't remember exact time frame, where the president of Harvard University, a lady, left their job.
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay, and then
Yes.
she wanted to explore the alternate things.
Yes.
There is another university that has come up in Austin.
Okay.
I don't know if you heard about that.
Okay.
Rajiv Malhotra ji is somewhat connected with that.
Oh, okay.
Where academics who are extremely tired of the mediocrity that is going on into the mainstream academia, they sort of, because they were literally muffled. They couldn't say what they wanted to say. And so some of those folks have come into Austin. It's still experimental, and they are trying to build something. Again, a consistent theme that I find everywhere. So many times in the West, you can see there is that right seed is there. All of that goes on, except one thing missing, and that's a big important thing, is a Dharma.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes,
and
yes.
I say that in the Austin, that is also happening. I have not followed the progress of this president of Harvard who left and what she has done. So I cannot comment on that. But maybe in the due course of time, Anaadi Foundation Gurukul, but many similar appropriate attempts, they can be the guiding force for what they can do with the great resources that they have.
Yes.
And with that, I come to Agastya Maharshi, your second question. And now I have a question for you on the Siddha Parampara. But someone like Sage Agastya, of course, every verse has a different meaning. But there is a Sage Agastya on the ground, of course, in the celestial sphere, celestial in the sense, like I would say, in the universe,
Yes.
and then the celestial spheres, which is a star canopus.
Yes.
So Agastya, as a individual, as a sage, as a great yati, great yogi, we know actually from the Purana perspective or from say Rigveda, Ramayana, Mahabharata, Itihas perspective, as much as there is so much information about him, we know so little. Okay, because it comes into bits and pieces. It comes into bits and pieces in the Rigveda, ditto in Ramayana, and ditto in Mahabharata. But in the background, it is always there. So that's on the Purana side. In the celestial sphere, as a sage, star canopus, its importance is it's so important. For example, I'll take 2 or 3, which is to say, Sage Agastya, or Star Agastya, I should say, becomes a pole star in the southern hemisphere every 26,000 years. And what the effect that it has an effect on the astronomy, therefore the agriculture and also navigation, but it has also effect into the Adhyatmic frame. And of course, the Adhyatmic frame has to do with the agriculture and navigation,
Yes.
right? It's a
Yes.
signal for that.
Yes.
So, for example, Chidambaram is the last location further south, that some south of Chidambaram, Agastya, see, this is a reference point. South of Chidambaram, Agastya from India is always visible.
Amazing.
And that is the significance of Chidambaram.
Okay.
So I was mentioning to one individual at the ashram So if you look at the position in the Chidambaram temple, so the two fingers that are showing down there of a Nataraja, they are saying, I have not forgotten Agastya, even when you don't see it. And he's saying from that border. Now in Parashar Tantra, which is a astronomy text, the journey of Agastya is given very interestingly. So you have heard the Puranic story of Agastya coming south of India.
Yes.
So of course that may be happening on the ground, but let's not talk about the ground. The Parashar Tantra talks of the celestial Agastya coming south of India, which is to say, when it is no longer visible north of India.
Nothing.
And that allows us to actually explore this 26,000 year cycle multiple times.
Yes.
That is the beauty of Agastya from a civilization perspective. But now my question to you, what is the role of Agastya into the Siddha tradition? But also what is a Siddha tradition and how that distinguishes from, say, other traditions in Sanatana?
Yes. So when we look at the Siddha tradition, now many people believe that this body ages and eventually perishes. And when we look at the body aging and perishing, in modern sciences, one of the approaches is how do we find a formula, like an anti-aging formula, by which we can extend our lifespan. Now the Siddhas go much further than that, and then not just look at anti-aging, but we find shlokas like Mrityurma Amritangamaya. So Mrita to Amrita. How do we actually turn into not exactly immortal, but the term here is Amrita. And what dies, this body perishes. But then if we look at it, the body is looked at in the Siddha tradition as made up of Pancha Mahabhuta. So the Pancha Mahabhuta, when the body perishes, they disintegrate. But if we actually look at it, for example, we live in Palani Kshetra. Palani is very famous for the Murugan temple. The Murugan temple, the Murugan Vigraha was formulated by an advanced Siddha process by Siddhar Bhoganadar. He is also called Bhogar in the South Indian tradition. He is also called Bhoganath in Navanath tradition, Navanath Sampradaya. So he is also called Lao Tzu, arguably Lao Tzu in the Chinese tradition. So his guru Kalanginadar, he is also a Nath. So Kalanginadar in south, Kalanginath in north, and Confucius in China. So like that, these are interlinkages. Are they the same persons or not? That is very tough to decode based on current ideas of history. So that's why I'm saying arguably. But here in the Siddha literature, you will find such references here, there, and everywhere. But having said this, definitely one caveat is that they are known to have multiple siddhis. That means one of the siddhi is parakaya pravesha, or where you can move from one body to another body. Now this has not been demonstrated in modern sciences.
Correct. Or even modern times.
Modern times.
In a visible way.
In a visible way.
But in Adi Shankaracharya, we hear that.
We hear that.
Yeah.
So that way, looking at just our Puranas as say having faith in our Puranas as the basic reference material, repository. Yeah. If we refer to the Purana, then it's clear that such things are valid. Okay. If we look at scientific journals, they may not look at it as valid. Yeah. So that's why here that distinction has to be made.
Yeah. But see that, just to interrupt, but that because you don't see them in scientific journal, because to study, so this is from a science perspective, these are metaphysical. It is beyond their purview.
Perfect.
Right. So maybe with a due course of time, as the science and technology evolves, we may be able to demonstrate that. Yes. But for now, you won't see that in the scientific journals. For the reasons you state.
Yeah. Exactly. So that is true because of the assumptions that we hold. Yeah. So one of the core assumptions that we hold is mrita, that is, the body disintegrates.
Okay.
But the body is always radiating the Panchabhuta. There is a live interaction. That's how the Siddhas look at it. So, disintegration is one thing, complete disintegration. But if we look at, there is a live flow of the Panchabhutas all the time happening. Now, what is it that is holding it in place, which we call as life? So, that the Siddhas have studied and worked on it. There are processes that make sure that the live interaction goes on, but it is like perpetuating the life cycle. So, it's like a perpetual machine. So, if we can say that. So, all the time energy is generated, and that is what we call as life. For that we consume energy, but it's not limited to just the food. It's also the prana. It's this live interaction. When the flow is appropriately modeled, then can there be a condition where we reach amrita from mrita. So, from a state where we assume death to be
Given.
It's given.
Yeah, or unavoidable.
Unavoidable. And nobody questions that. So, the Siddhas question even that. So, even a fundamental assumption is questioned.
Yeah.
Nothing is left to just vague interpretation or just broad assumptions. So, that way we can look at the Siddhas as very highly advanced scientifically. And these are still preserved in the for example, in the Tamil texts. So, Agastya maharshi represents the foremost of the Siddhas.
Okay.
So, he is like the Mutavar. Mutavar means the elder, eldest.
Eldermost.
Eldermost.
Siddha tradition, yeah.
Siddha tradition.
The initiator, you can say.
One can say that.
Yeah.
So, that way he has worked both in Sanskrit as well as in Tamil.
Yes.
So, there are Sanskrit texts attributed to Agastya maharshi.
Yes.
There are Tamil texts, for example, Tamil Perunul Kaviyam. So, there is a, Agastya, 12,000, verses. Bhogar, Ezhayiram or Saptakandam, 7,000 verses. So, these all seem very advanced now, given our assumptions, the current state of assumptions that we have. Nothing else, Otherwise, they are processes which we might find it difficult to believe because it breaks our assumptions.
Our
all the way through.
Current assumptions.
Yeah. And that can be quite shocking.
Yes.
So
unsettling.
When we unsettling
also.
Unsettling. Yeah. So when we say Siddha Parampara, so this is a full lineage where that knowledge is preserved and transmitted in a Guru-shishya Parampara, because the way knowledge is transferred, when we look at a current state of education, it is also more generic in nature. So where it's more general knowledge that is taught to everybody. So general knowledge is fine. But when we have to work upon fundamental assumptions in society, so general knowledge alone might not suffice, because there needs to be a close association, intertwining of the Panchakosha, if we can say, where there is absolute agreement or absolute communion between the teacher and the student, which a mass education might not provide the context for such an engagement in the first place, where it is more, let's say, livelihood based. But this cannot be just limited to just livelihood. It has to go deeper than that.
So in the mainstream education system, from the teacher's point of view, it's a livelihood based, but there's another problem. The teacher doesn't have a freedom in the sense somebody else is telling them what to cover without telling them why. Because they themselves don't know.
Yes.
Just to intervene, one question. So you're talking of Siddha tradition and you talked about this interaction between the Guru-shishya. In our conversation the other day, you had mentioned when you went into long meditations, and I want to ask about that also. Like it could be unsettling for them, but then it's interesting for them to hear some of the long meditation sessions you went through. But you also mentioned it came to you that Babaji Avatar is your guru in this time. What, if to the extent you are comfortable sharing, what is it that led you to that conclusion?
To the extent that I am allowed to share, I will freely share. My remembrance of my childhood was that I constantly used to see the body and mind here. It was the attitude of a witness which always used to exist.
Hmm.
But at that time, I did not have knowledge. At that time, everyone's image of me was more prominent than my self image. My self image had not awakened fully, if you can say that. Because as a child, when you grow up, you are looking at others, and their image of you guides you more than your own self image.
Trying to meet their expectations.
Their expectations, like going to school, regular knowledge, and so on. No? So that way, that process took me further. But it used to have certain, I used to experience certain discordant notes, if you can say that. Some dissonance here and there, because it would not stick well. But I did not have knowledge to liberate me from those discordant notes. You need a lot of knowledge. If you encounter dissonance, even to figure out that is dissonance, it takes a lot of experience and knowledge.
Yes.
So I did not have knowledge. When we say knowledge here, this is fundamental knowledge. This is not like a livelihood based knowledge. It's not like engineering sciences or math, physics, chemistry, biology cannot solve it. This is more knowledge like what is available in Vedanta.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like at a existential level, ontological epistemology.
Yes,
like
yes.
Limits of knowledge.
Limits of knowledge. So that I was encountering all the time, because I used to see the body and mind here. And imagine for a child, if I cry, I would see myself crying. If I laugh, I would see myself laughing. If I speak, I see myself speaking. And I would also be aware of what the other person is doing. So not just me, but what the other person is doing. Now this can cause a lot of dissonance, because it's like a flow.
Yeah.
Flow means it's spontaneous response, you know. Even if it's a reaction, now people differentiate between reaction and response. But you know, without going there, one would see everyone else being normal in the sense of, you know, responding to situations in a spontaneous manner, while I will feel somehow I am slightly disadvantaged. You see, because I am not able to do that.
Yeah.
It is like when you laugh, if you look at yourselves in the mirror, would you be able to laugh peacefully?
Yeah.
If you cry and you look at yourselves in the mirror, would you be able to cry peacefully? You know, peacefully means, you know, spontaneously.
Correct.
Because now we wish to be in the flow state,
Yeah.
where that flow or that spontaneity of response or reaction, that determines how free you are. Here I was not so free, because I used to observe it.
Yeah.
When you observe it, the intensity of it, when we say free, the freedom is to do with intensity of the reaction, right? That feels good. Like you get angry,
Yeah.
you feel, in a sense, you know, I'm not saying it's, in a sense you feel good,
Yeah.
because you're reacting
You're
strongly.
showing true emotion.
Yeah, for you it's true,
Yes.
right? And others also perceive it as true.
Yes.
But here, for me, I'm observing it. So, would it be true for me? Not so much, because if I wish it away, it will go away.
Yeah.
Oh, then that creates dissonance, because others are not like that,
Yeah.
and I am like that.
Yeah.
And that used to bother me sometimes, but not all the time. Till about my teenage, it was not so much of a bother. Even at that time, periodically it would emerge. For example, when I'm sitting in classroom, I would zoom out, where I will be observing everything that is happening from a distance, from a, you can call it a divine distance, you know, that is also divine. From a divine distance, I would be the observer.
Including yourself, you would be
Yeah,
part of that.
everything zoomed out.
Uh,
I'm saying second standard, third standard, I remember such, yeah, and suddenly if, you know, people don't see me responding, they will snap me out of it. And that would be like a jerk, you know, it will be like, but I would not have the language or the understanding or the mental model to capture this.
Got it. Yeah.
So that way, over a period of time, when you're snapped sufficiently out of it, that means you start looking at yourselves as, I don't want this, or it's not acceptable in the society, and hence it's better.
Yeah, I want to be normal.
I want to be normal like them.
sense.
Yeah, yeah. So that was the growth that was happening. When it went into teenage, I started also asking questions, because naturally these things kick in. with teenage, with puberty, such things start happening.
Who you are asking the questions to yourself or whoever?
To myself.
To yourself.
Because also it's like, let's say, non-urban Indian child, a very normal family. It's not so much encouraged to question,
Yes.
It's more like
True.
you just go with the flow.
Yeah.
And I was not so much of a rebel, it's internal questioning. So at that time, I started questioning the nature of emotions, the nature of what I'm going through. At that time, my sister gifted me Nanganallur Anjaneer, Hanuman Ji.
Okay.
And he became my friend, philosopher, and guide, my Ishta Devata. So daily I used to chant Hanuman Chalisa in teenage, And that was a huge anchoring process for me, because I could now freely talk with someone,
Yeah.
and not be considered abnormal, say.
Yeah.
As a child, look at it as a teenager, where you just want to be simple, acceptable. My life is flowing smoothly. I have an awesome family. I had awesome friends. I had awesome societal setup around me. It was not disturbing at all. It was a smooth process. I am talking of an inner process,
Correct.
which is prominent. And hence Hanumanji came, when he came into my life, it was glorious, So I could freely share with him, because if I were to share, for example, one of the things that at that time I remember was I used to read the newspapers, and now I know much better, but at that time I used to think that is the world. My world was not so disturbing, but the world presented in the newspapers was very disturbing.
Yes.
And for a teenager, you wish to do something, As a child, I would not have responded like that, maybe. But as a teenager, you wish to do something, I need to do something to do, how can I be of benefit to the world? That was a natural response that I had. Now, if I express this, let's say, to my parents, they would, they're good people, but they would at max respond, your concerns are valid, we also don't know what to do. Now the only thing that you can do is study. Right, because they are also in a position of constraint.
Yes.
Because our reality is stable. The places that we have been, nothing of the sort mentioned in the newspapers are happening in our reality, our world.
Yeah.
So
Because it is disturbing, it is in the news.
it's in the news. Okay. So, but for a child who does not have this perspective, it's very disturbing, because it's alarming, and that's the world.
Yeah.
But my world was not like that. It was very peaceful, very calm, very stable family, very stable environment. Everyone's life is peaceful. So these sorts of discussions I used to have with Hanumanji. So I went out with him, and that used to provide a lot of clarity that over a period of time matured. Then this gradually transformed into college life, where it was active, good friends, everything. And naturally, as you rightly said, in college, or when we look at university education, higher education, now the concept of dharma and moksha are not central.
Yes.
The concept of artha and kama, let's say artha, like why go into engineering college? To earn well.
Yeah. The job is kind of
Job.
that time at least.
Yeah, at that time, job is the central. It's not looked at as empowering yourselves with knowledge. It's more looked at in terms of, how do I get a job? So that is the central purpose with which I am oriented at that time. So naturally, that led me to further steps. How do I become a multimillionaire? And hence I landed in the US for my master's education. And post the education, it was intense. It was deadlines, and post graduating, somehow I felt empty. And my roommates also, were not there for about 3 days. And at that time, a deep spiritual experience happened, which was
in the US.
It was in the US. So a deep spiritual experience, which was highly transformative. Then later, when I started investigating further into the nature of the experience, then I started understanding that experience in the Yoga Shastra, it's called Samadhi, specifically Nirvikalpa Samadhi. Then I had started understanding the nature of the mind, nature of life, what is meant by prarabdha, the role of my guru, and so on. And I had a ajna to return back to Bharat. So, in Yoga Shastra, this is described as Ajna Chakra. Not for any limited purpose. It's actually Ajna Chakra. But just that when we discuss the chakras, it's like a live phenomena. It's just like, for example, the Annamaya Kosha. If you don't feed it, it does not grow.
Okay.
Likewise, the Pranamaya Kosha, if you don't feed it appropriately, it will not grow. The Manomaya Kosha similarly. If you don't feed it appropriately, the Manomaya Kosha will not grow. Vijnanamaya Kosha, we definitely understand. If we don't study well, knowledge we don't get, right? So now this understanding, you can imagine in the context. My koshas were being fully developed, an accelerated development, because of which I had such an experience. Now these have started coming into my range of vision.
This is that after that 3-day
After that,
event,
yes,
single event,
yeah.
Continue. That similar things continue.
So it from that point on, it's accelerated because now it has come into my full vision.